Hi, everyone. It's BJ Roach coming to you from home once again. Today, I am joined by Chris Bishop, who works for the state of Texas as the state park superintendent and a police officer as well. So, hi, Chris.
Hi, BJ. How are you?
Good. Thanks so much for joining us. So, I have three questions for you today. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Question number one. Can you tell all of our listeners, mostly students, what it is that you do day to day? So, tell us about your job.
Okay, sure. So, I work for Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, and I'm a park superintendent and state park police officer. The park that I work at is in the shadow of Houston, Texas, the fourth largest city in the United States. So it's a pretty high volume park, and the park experience itself is amazing. We're best known for, if we had a niche recreational use, I would have to say it's wildlife viewing, wildlife photography. But we're best known for American alligator viewing. It's the home of the American alligator. So day to day, it really varies a lot. So what I think about, like with a public land, a parcel of public land that's developed for recreational use, like a state park, it's like
Hmm.
a small city. So all the functions that have to happen in that small city have to happen in the state park. The difference is your population is largely transient, arriving on Friday and departing again on Sunday. In my job, it's sort of, if you combined like a city administrator with the chief of police, that would be what my job looks like. So weekdays, it's really very important and very, very boring things. Conference calls, staff meetings, meeting with employees, mentoring, but more and more the parts of the job that really light me up. I'll talk more about this later. Community involvement, diversity and engagement planning, and work around that. Weekends is almost entirely Friday through Sunday for me is direct service, customer service, and law enforcement.
Well, how long
So
have you been with the state of Texas?
I've worked for Texas Parks and Wildlife Department for about 13 years.
Nice.
And I also worked for USDA Forest Service for about 7 years, both in East Texas and in northern New England.
Very good. So, can you tell question number two? Can you tell us a little bit about your time as a college student? What was your major? What was life like at UMaine when you were there? And then the second part of it is, how does that all relate to the work that you do now? How did you find yourself in this type of work, and what's the relation to your college years?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was a little bit of a late bloomer for college. I did 6 years of military service at a high school, Sumner Memorial High School in Hancock County. Uh, it the major was Parks, Recreation, and Tourism, and it was
Mhm.
in the Department of Forest Management.
Yeah.
And I had an amazing experience at the University of Maine. So what I loved about the program and how I felt like it really helped to prepare me for my career is sort of a multidisciplinary approach. So there was a lot of like hard sciences, geology, forestry, chemistry, wildlife management, but it was blended really nicely with social sciences and communication. So I had coursework in journalism. I had coursework in public speaking. I had, it's really a great curriculum. Um, at the time, and I think the curriculum has changed a little bit in the program, although it's still excellent. We had three concentrations, and mine was for environmental interpretation. And the only thing that I wanted to do when I was at University of Maine is to be a park naturalist and be doing campfire programs and guided nature tours and things like that. And I was able to do that for a time in my career. But what I found is, as I got deeper in my career, I thought more and more about legacy and impact and where I could have a greater influence, and that's what really carried me into management.
Nice. Can you tell me a little bit more about your career path? So, what was your first job out of college, and then how did you get to where you are now?
Yeah, so I was determined when when I was at University of Maine that I was gonna, because by the time between military service and getting some work experience when I was in college, I was almost 30 by the time I entered the workforce. So I was really determined. So every summer, I did a different internship or work experience related to the field. So I interned with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Eastern Maine, and then I worked as a naturalist at a remote fly-in lodge in interior Alaska one summer. I actually had my
Oh,
first experience with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department as an hourly part-time park naturalist at a place that's no longer even a state park, but north of Houston at the time. And then I worked for Friends of Acadia, close to my hometown in Acadia National Park. Once I graduated, my first job, I worked for Texas Parks and Wildlife right out of college as a park naturalist and volunteer coordinator at a little park about an hour east of Dallas, Purvis Creek State Park. I was there 2 years, and then I left. I got picked up by USDA Forest Service. At the time, I had this idea in my head that if you worked in public lands, that state level government was like being in minor league baseball. And if you wanted to really play in the show, then you work for the federal government, which turned out to be a really poor model. That's just not how it is. But it was a great experience. So I worked for U.S. Forest Service, Davy Crockett National Forest for about 3 years, and I was a recreation trails and wilderness technician. So I was a utility plant operator. I was a water and wastewater operator. I did a lot of maintenance and things like that. So very different experiences for me. I left there. I went to White Mountain National Forest in northern New Hampshire, and I managed a couple of Forest Service visitor centers, one in Bethel, Maine, and one on the Androscoggin Ranger Station, just north of Mount Washington.
You've been everywhere.
Yeah, that's right. That brought me back to Texas Parks and Wildlife. This park here, Brazos Bend, I was the assistant superintendent, and that was when I got commissioned as a state police officer as well here. I left here. I was superintendent at Lake Whitney State Park in Central Texas for a few years, and then about 6 years ago, I had a chance to come back here. Which the truth is this really is what feels like home for me now.
Nice. Did you always have an interest in law enforcement, or did that just kind of come out of your experiences?
No, that's a great question. So my conservation law enforcement's in my family. Both my maternal grandfather and my uncle, my mom's brother, were lieutenants in the Maine Warden Service. I had no interest in law enforcement, but I loved public lands. And in the job at Brazos Bend that I mentioned, the first one, the assistant superintendent, I interviewed for the job, and the superintendent called me and said, "Hey, my team really liked you. They were excited about a lot of things about you, but we really need a police officer. So if you want to be a manager here, you gotta get a law enforcement commission as well." So I had a heart to heart with myself and really thought it through. But in the end, I did it because I felt like I need to get the job that I wanted. But I love working in conservation law enforcement as well.
Great. So I'm veering off the three questions because this is
No worries, no worries.
this is just interesting. So what's the best part about your job? What is the best day for you in your job?
Yeah, it's changed for me a lot. Like I mentioned early in my career, all I wanted to do was do programs. So a day that I had a school group come out to the park and I take them out on a nature walk, or I give an evening campfire talk, that was the best day. But now anymore, the things that I work on are not things that I had any interest in early in my career. I love mentoring employees. So when we bring on new employees, Brazos Bend State Park has developed a bit of a reputation as sort of a training ground. So we bring in strong applicants. We give them, because it's such a busy park, and for better or for worse, we've had lots of experiences with natural disasters and things like that. So we can get folks a lot of experience in a short amount of time, and then place them out in other parks where they can use their leadership and carry that park forward. So I love mentoring. I love community involvement. I speak at Chambers of Commerce events. I mentioned the diversity and inclusion work is something that was never on my radar for me. I'm ethnically French Canadian, born in Presque Isle, Maine. My 23andMe genetic test says that people as white as me should not exist in the world in 2020, and yet somehow I end up being the cultural intelligence trainer for the application side of Texas Parks and Wildlife. Just amazing experiences that I never expected. I think for me right now, those are the best parts.
That's cool. What about the most challenging part of your job?
Um, the scheduling is really tough. One thing that I would want somebody that wants to get into a public lands management career to understand is we have a responsibility, if we really want to be of service to the people, to be here at the times when the people are out at their public lands. So that's nights, weekends, and holidays. So for a single employee, that's not such a big deal. But for someone who has a spouse and who has children, and they want to be able to celebrate Christmas on Christmas, or they want to have their spouse home for Thanksgiving dinner, that there are going to be a lot of years where that's just not possible.
Okay.
Can I give you one other challenge?
Please.
Yeah, so it's a 365-day, and this is just something that I would want people to know and have their eyes open. The operation at a state park or like a National Park Service site that has an overnight component, it's a 365-day a year, 24-hour a day, 7-day a week operation. So 8 to 5, when a lot of the workforce has gone home, we still have team members who are out in the park, and we have members of the public who are relying on us for both their safety and to have a quality park experience. So that can be demanding, and it takes a while for people to figure out some good work-life balance skills in order to do the job, continue to maintain a good attitude, and not let them make them crazy. Does it make sense?
Absolutely. So kind of going off of that, you talked about that you really love to train and mentor new employees. What advice would you give to the typically aged college student who's going out into the workforce based on what you see with new employees?
Um, so I thought about this for a long time, and the advice that I have, I definitely, for someone that wants to work in public lands or conservation, I think it's solid for them, but I think it really would apply to a lot of different people. And the first thing, it's not even particularly work related, but I think somebody that wants to be able to give their best to the world, to their family, to their career, needs to have a good self-care um, program in place for themselves. And it'll look a little bit different for everybody, but for me, like exercising vigorously, eating healthfully, getting enough sleep, managing stress effectively, and making time and space for the things and the people that are lives that are most important, making them a priority. That's like, that may not be important the first 5 or 10 years of a career, but 20 years in, that's the stuff that's going to keep people excited and doing a good job. And the lack of that, just from what I've seen, is what leads to burnout and discontent in a job. So good self-care routine is one thing I would say. I would say keep a big picture on what the employer, the applicant really wants to do. Most of the time, if we really dig down, I don't think that the goal is we want to be a park naturalist or park manager or an English teacher or a civil engineer. We want to fulfill our soul's purpose. We want to make the world a better place for people. And I think if we go into that, we don't lock ourselves into any one job. Like what I mentioned with having the opportunity and the honor to be able to provide cultural intelligence training to other state park employees, simply because I work in the most culturally diverse county in the United States, and that's reflected in our visitorship. If somebody closes off their heart to other possibilities because they only self-identify as this one part, that one part of the job, I think they're cheating themselves in the world of some potential things that they can offer. Um, I think I would recommend anyone, like, your job, your career is what you do. It's not who you are. So I think people need to make, like, I learned it took me probably 15 years into my career in a pretty bad case of professional burnout where I figured out this is one piece of me. Yeah, I don't know it's the best piece of me, but it's, my career is important to me, but it's not the only part of my life that's important. And when I honor that, I'm able to offer a better version of myself to my colleagues, to the public, and to the world. The last thing that I was thinking about, BJ, I think it's important for people to have non-career related interests in people in their lives. Um,
Absolutely.
I see a lot, I don't know if you see this in your career, but I see a lot in public lands and especially law enforcement. People who work for the Forest Service or people who work for state parks, and especially law enforcement, all the other people in their lives do the same things. They work in a state park, or they work on a national forest, or they're all cops. And it can develop a really skewed view of the world and people, and it's not healthy. I also think having other things in your life besides your job, hobbies or things that you do, it's different for everybody, right? For me, it's yoga, meditation, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, period. And all of those things have helped me be a better state park employee while I'm here.
That's great advice. Great advice. So
Thank you.
my final question for you, I have one more that I didn't kind of give you ahead of time, but I know that in the past year, so you're a part of our main mentor program, and I know that in the past you've helped our students kind of navigate some application processes and given them some advice to enter into your profession. So do you have just like one or two really quick, either resumes that you look at or interviewing tips that you can give our students who are interested in doing this type of work?
Yeah, more for like in the way that Texas Parks and Wildlife Department approaches hiring, the resume is less important than the interview.
Yeah.
The application is all done through an online application system. To be honest, when I'm reviewing applications and I hire a lot of people, I don't even look at resumes if, as long as the work history is given a complete picture. But for interviewing, that's most important. Everything leading up to the interview, like the work history, the job application, everything is to get the interview, but the interview is going to be really important in that hiring decision. So I've actually got like a 30-minute training that I give to other state park employees and
Ah,
prospective state park employees about this. If I had one piece of advice that I was going to say, the best advice I've ever received, it's going to sound pretty direct, so I'll give some context if you don't
okay.
mind. But when you're sitting in an interview panel and you're being interviewed, focus solely on the question being asked by the panelists. Don't worry about the response, but really listen to that question. Then after the question is being done, when the panelist is done asking the question, take a minute, a breath or two, think through the question, compose your answer in your head, give that answer, and then stop talking. One thing that I've seen over and over again, after somebody responds, sometimes they give a really thoughtful response, and the panelists are all busy trying to jot down notes to remember what the applicant said later. The applicant gets nervous in the space and the quiet, and they blurt out something impulsive and damning, where not only is it not helpful, but it also starts to put some questions in the panelists' minds about, is this person somebody that we want in our workforce? So it's not that once you've finished responding, you can't add anything else, but I visualize a colander in my head, and anything that passes through the colander has got to be something that helps me and conveys why I'm a better fit for that position. So that's one thing. Second piece of advice, is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like power dynamic during an interview, one thing that I counsel my employees when they're interviewing, sometimes I see applicants who give all the power away, and we think this hiring manager has the position that I want. So they've got the power in the relationship, but the interview is always two ways. And I think it's better for the applicant if they keep that in mind, that the hiring manager is interviewing the applicant is interviewing the hiring manager and the rest of the team as well. So I would never suggest that an applicant be flippant or arrogant during an interview. But for me, recognizing that I have something of value that this hiring manager is interested in, and if I didn't have that, they would never have invited me. I would never have made it to that point. That affects my interview in a really positive way, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I think that's excellent advice for our students. So, one more question, bonus question, really quick, just for fun. If you weren't in this field, so if you weren't in law enforcement, public lands, parks and recreation, what would you do with your life?
So money's no object?
Money's no object. Dream job, dream life purpose.
So I love public lands. I love outdoor recreation, but I guess you call it a side hustle,
Hmm.
is I'm a registered yoga teacher. I teach vinyasa, flow, and yin yoga, and I teach meditation. If I could make a living and have the kind of income stream that I wanted from health, wellness, fitness, and yoga, I would love to be a full-time yoga teacher.
That's cool. So you're very well rounded. You do lots and lots of things.
Thanks. I've tried to make sure that my life is fairly balanced. Learned the hard way the first 10 years of my career that not doing that causes some problems.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for joining us today. Very valuable information for our students. And just a reminder that Chris is a member of our main mentor program. So if any students would like to be connected with Chris to maybe get some more in-depth information about what it is that you do every day, or do an informational interview with you, would that be okay?
Absolutely. I'd love to.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks, BJ. Take care.
Bye.